chance, just one chance to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. One thing we are going to be diving into kind of off the bat, something that I wanted to cover, and that was the Fed. They, again, are hiking the rates, which I've told people this before. I've said on this broadcast before that it's a catch-22. It's the double-edged sword. The Fed has artificially kept interest rates low, so we are overdue for a rate hike. Except it's not really the Fed's place to be deciding, free market rates. So we're overdue for the rate hike, but because they kept it artificially low for so long, that there is going to be a consequence for that when they hike the rates, which they have done. And this would be the second time. So to start off, I wanted to dive into a Ron Paul Liberty report from last week where he covers this issue. So we'll go ahead and dive into that. Make sure I don't stick you guys with commercials.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, very good. I understand you have a little announcement for us today before we start our regular program.
Yeah, we're going to try something a little bit different. We appreciate our live viewers. We have so many, and the numbers increase every day, and we want to try to find ways to engage the people that take some time out of their day to watch our program.
Right.
So we're going to try at the end of the show to take some questions from the comments that people leave. I'll try to pick some good ones out and throw them at you and see what happens.
Uh-oh. We can't be prepared, huh?
Hot seat, yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to be talking today a little bit about what went on yesterday because the financial markets were very, very active, and they weren't reacting the way most people predicted, especially the people at the Fed and the Wall Streeters, and they didn't follow the rules, and they were wringing their hands, what's going on? But yesterday, the Fed did exactly what everybody expected, and that was they raised the interest rates 1/4 point. And it's been a consensus for years now that interest rates have been too low too long. and down to essentially zero. They've been realizing that they have to raise interest rates. So they've raised them 3 times, though, in the last year, 1/4 point each time, not even a whole percent during this time. And that's over the past 11 years, they haven't dared raise interest rates. But I think what this does, it calls attention to the fact that the Federal Reserve really is pretty inept. They're economic planners. That's the major instrument for planning our economy. And they work on the Keynesian belief that wealth comes from creating money out of thin air. If you create money and easy credit and low interest rates, people will do certain things and the economy will grow. They work also on the assumption that that economic growth and the downturn is a consequence of free market economics, which is not true. Who creates the business cycle? Well, it's the Federal Reserve. But they blame it on the market for their excuse to come in and manipulate the markets either up or down, and they don't do a very good job. And I think yesterday was an example of a lousy job and pointed out some of their shortcomings, because the reactions were almost opposite of what they had expected. For instance, when you raise interest rates, generally speaking, people think, well, you can get more interest on your dollars that you have in the bank, and the dollar is an important currency. But that didn't happen. The dollar went down 1%, which is significant for one day. And ordinarily, you know, when interest rates go up, they claim, which I don't believe, that interest rates rise, and that hurts gold, and gold will go down. Well, gold went up significantly so. They have forgotten the fact that when interest rates were skyrocketing in the 1970s, that's when gold went from $35 an ounce up to $800 an ounce with rising interest rates. And ordinarily, in the past, when the Fed was manipulating the economy and there is a recession that they created, they said, all right, it's all over. I remember 1982, they had to have a ringing out type of recession from the boom inflation of the 70s. So it was announced policy, well, now we're going to lower interest rates, but raise interest rates. And when you raise interest rates, the general consensus is that the stocks will go down. Well, yesterday, the stocks skyrocketed to record highs. So things aren't working out so well, and they're sort of wringing their hands. But I don't think it's working out very well because they're working on a false notion that they have control, that they are significant, and all they do is manipulate things, building bubbles and setting the stage, you know, for these corrections. So I think that's what we're witnessing now, Daniel. This whole thing is emphasizing that Keynesian economics doesn't work, inflationism doesn't work, central banking doesn't work, and but you can't give up on that because there'd be problems. You know, they might worry about who's going to pay for the debt and this sort of thing.
You know, there was an extraordinary moment yesterday at the news conference with Janet Yellen, and we saw this on Zero Hedge, of course. But Bloomberg TV's Kathleen Hayes kind of had an emperor has no clothes kind of question. Maybe I can just throw it at you a little bit, because everyone else was applauding the Fed's decision, and she here's what she had to say. She was asking this to Janet Yellen. GDP is tracking very low. Measures of labor compensation are not threatening to boost inflation anytime fast. Consumer is not picking up very much. Fiscal policy, we don't know what's going to happen with Donald Trump, and yet you have to raise the rates now. So what is the motivation here? The economy is so far from your forecast in terms of GDP. Why does the Fed have to move now? What does this signal then about the rest of the year?
Well, this demonstrates the fallacy of this economic planning, in that they do know. Sometimes people ask me, you know, what should you do? What would you do? Would you raise them or lower them? Well, in a free market, you don't even have to think about that. But I think she hit the nail on the head. If she was sort of speaking from, you know, an interventionist viewpoint. You know, you're interviewing, but you're not following the rules. And why are you doing this? And this might cause a downturn. But she is right. Real wages are down right now, and they're down, you know, more sharply than the GDP. Debt is skyrocketing much faster than the GDP. And there's evidence now that department sales are down and restaurant sales are down. So there's a lot of sign of weakness. So this is a lot different than 2008. A lot of people think, well, when we have this bust again, they keep thinking of the last recession. But I think it'll be different. I think there's signs now that we're more likely to have stagflation or a inflationary depression, because we see prices going up, consumer prices and producer prices, more than they want to admit, and they don't really have any tools left. So I think we're going to see prices going up because we see them already creeping up. But gold is a signal too. You know, if the people who buy and sell gold looked at this and say, hey, you know what? This is going to be good for the traders in gold, so gold goes up $30, you know, this sort of thing. So I think she was absolutely right from their interventionist viewpoint, that they're not even following their own rules, and they're just sitting and crossing their fingers, and Yellen keeps saying, nothing is locked in stone. We can change our mind anytime we want, which is absolutely true. And then they wonder why there's uncertainty. The only thing that is a little bit baffling to a degree, and that is the exuberance in the stock market. And that comes from, it's not like it's fiction, because it's based on hope that Trump will accomplish, you know, some of the things that he says, the good things, not the increase in the deficit and not war and things like that. But he's claiming that he'll spend money on military, stimulate the economy, spend money on infrastructure, and he really is not worried about the deficit. And the markets look at this and say, you know, this looks pretty good, along with cutting taxes. So if you if you increase spending in certain areas and you don't really cut anything, he lists at the things he might cut, but this will you know, lead to better times. And people, I think the Trump euphoria is a market reality, but just as fast as it came, it can leave as well. You know, this is what is unpredictable. Just as all these reports yesterday didn't fit the model. I mean, and I saw one report, that's not our model. Our model said this, and they bet a lot of money on this too. And that, of course, the answer to that, of course, is what Mises teaches, is that you can't predict human action. You can't predict what people will do with their money. You give them back some of their own money, you say, well, that'll stimulate the economy. Well, they might pay off debt. And you don't know maybe, you know, they'll spend it overseas or something. There's no way they can predict human actions. And this is what's coming in. Generally speaking, the markets have reacted in a somewhat predictable manner over the years. The Fed would create bubbles, then they would deflate the bubbles, and then they would get interest rates lower. But they never look at the real problem of the misinformation they get from trying to find the right interest rate. And that's what this whole story was about. They don't know the right interest rate. They're just guessing at it. And the other thing is, it encourages too much debt, which we talked about, and it also encourages something that people don't talk about a whole lot, and that's the malinvestment. Because if you combine low interest rates that make business people do the wrong things at the wrong time, and also Congress contributes in it as well. You know, they might direct more of the money into medical care. That doesn't mean you get more medical care. You might end up getting higher prices in medical care. Same way with housing bubble, with Community Reinvestment Act. So the money is loose and the housing boom is going, and then the Congress comes along. You must loan money to people who are risky lenders, you know, borrowers. So it's just doomed to fail, and I think this is a sign that they never did have much control, and they're going to lose a lot more, and there's going to be some real surprises. And the one surprise that I sort of lean strongly to is that there will be a lot of inflation for all prices. At the same time, the economy will be weak. They might call it stagflation. We didn't have a recent depression. It was just a super recession. In the same way with this. They're not going to call it, you know, an inflationary depression, but that's possible. And the worst scenario for that would be things like Zimbabwe and Venezuela. Right now, we're not on the verge of that, but it's conceivable. I mean, paper money can self-destruct in a major fashion, and everybody suffers.
You know, we've talked a lot about real news versus fake news on the show. And, you know, these things that you're reciting are obviously from your years and years of research. We also we turned to Zero Hedge. We have this Bloomberg account of the problems. Why are they doing it now? But out of curiosity, I flipped over to the Washington Post, and they had a very different take. Here's what their headline was: Fed raises rates amid signs of a strengthening economy. It had a quote from Janet Yellen. The simple message is that the economy is doing well.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of 07 when you were warning about the housing bubble and everyone said, you're crazy. It's fine.
Everything is wonderful. And, you know, yesterday I was on one of the shows and they interviewed me. And I suggested it was a lot of trouble. And he said, no, that's not the case. Things are looking real good. And it turns out that we don't know exactly when the correction will come, but it surely will. Now, Gary Kahn, the new economic advisor for Trump, had a comment about the Fed, and he said the Fed is doing a very good job. And so I don't think that there will be changes in Fed policy under the new administration. I think it's going to continue exactly the way, because Trump has said that he has tremendous respect for the Federal Reserve. This, to me, will be the big issue.
Okay, well, we do have a couple of questions if you're ready to handle a couple. The first one comes from Derek Miner, and I think it's a good one. I think a lot of people are wondering this. He said, I hate the Federal Reserve, too, but isn't raising it 0.25 a good thing?
Well, the market, if you allowed the market to determine interest rates, it would go up a lot more than that. It's an impossible thing to pick the right thing. Yes, the direction is probably the right thing to do, allow to get back to a more sensible thing. But they're locked into a problem. They're saying they're raising interest rates. At the same time, what she said yesterday is we won't allow the overnight lending rate to go up, the Fed funds rate. She's going to control that, which is, you know, which is the benefit for the bankers. You know, it's a subsidy to bankers that they can always borrow at what she says is going to be, claiming that keeping interest rates very low and beneficial to the banks, she can regulate things with the overnight rates and ignore the others and let the 10-year bills go up and maybe 30-year bonds and things that will rise. But yes, if you were looking for a hint of the Fed going in the right direction, yeah, they should have never lowered them to 1%. But I just don't like to get in this thing of tinkering around and saying, well, I don't want to endorse the system. It's the system that's wrong, and they shouldn't have lowered them. And since they are too low, I guess going in that direction is the right direction, but it's not necessary to solve the problem. You know, and I think this is why the reaction is so confusing, because it's not a market. It's not a market effect. I mean, this is created once more by the Fed. I mean, the amount of time that the financial markets concentrate on what will the Fed say or do. One word yesterday was key to this whole thing. You know, and they just look at this. That is so far removed from the marketplace, and that's why you can't get a straight answer or know what to expect next week or next month. Yeah.
Here's another one that is interesting. It's Brent ANCAP. I like that name. The Obama recovery has taken 7 years and it's still bad. How long would a genuine recovery take if the government didn't interfere with the liquidation process?
Now that's a good question, because that's the key to it. And that individual probably knows a little bit about the Depression of 1921. Yes, stagnation is what Obama had, but I believe that the stagnation will continue. I don't think the liquidation will occur, because that's the way you get economic growth again. But the big problem is there's nobody that's going to permit it. The Fed won't permit it. The members of Congress won't permit it, and because it's painful to go through. It's sort of like trying to get somebody off drugs, and going cold turkey on that isn't very pleasant. So an economy would probably be in very bad shape to allow the correction to occur. But if we'd allowed that to happen in 2009 and had the liquidation, which they did in 1921, it was over in a year. But GDP would not limp along and pretend that it's growing at 1% and fudge the figures and try to hide it. That makes it a chronic thing. This is what Japan had done, not allow the liquidation. And we're now at that point, too, of not allowing liquidation. But that is what should be done. If we're going to restore soundness, it would have to be in collaboration with spending. You could go back on a gold standard. You could have the liquidation. You could say we're not going to run a welfare state. We're going to quit fighting all these wars. And everybody knows that's too much for people they get hysterical over this. But that's the only way you're going to get back to economic growth. Japan's been looking for a way for 20 years. And things weren't quite as bad, but we started all this mess in the 30s. And it took all the 30s and World War II to rearrange things, liquidate the debt, and then they went back to economic growth again. And that's what we're doing now. I mean, it's still the past 8 years have been horrible, and these statistics shows that it's a very weak economy, much weaker than anybody wants to admit. The GDP is just, not growing. I mean, debt is growing tremendously, but not the GDP.
In fact, we have a great chart that shows this. We talked about this before the show. The red, of course, is debt, and the green is GDP growth.
I think this is a magnificent chart. It proves my point, and it's a great picture, because the interventionists, the planners, the Federal Reserve, the Keynesians, the big spenders, the people who believe in debt, believe in the red line that is the salvation. This is what you do. You print money and you pay all the bills. But guess what happened? Debt goes up, but they don't get the growth. It isn't translated into growth, and that's what that green line. There's no the growth isn't there. It's very puny, and it'll continue until they change their method. The debt line is going to continue to go up, and toward the end of a currency, I mean, it just goes up, and that's when prices start to skyrocket and lose control. People say, well, when's that going to happen? Nobody knows exactly when it'll happen, because once again, it has a lot to do with individuals making decisions. And if right now they don't feel like they want to go out and spend as much on certain things, it may last for a while. But ultimately, that chart proves that you can't get economic growth just by printing money. So what'll happen is that debt, and, again, that's associated with real wages. That also explains why real wages don't go up. What happens is that line, the red line, is going to go up straighter. The green line is probably going to turn down, and GDP will go down. And right now, there's some prediction about GDP. The recently one at Atlanta showed that the GDP is, and I think that was mentioned in those hearings yesterday, the GDP is not very strong at all. And it isn't reliable either, because the irony of the GDP is that if government decides to spend, and Trump wants to spend a lot of money on military, that'll help the GDP, but he'll be buying more drone missiles and dropping them over on people and blowing them up. And yet that added to GDP. In contrast, if you took that money, you have to ask the question, instead of what? Where would that money be? It would have been left in the pockets of the people. They might have been able to afford their health care or something like that. They might have been able to afford education for their children. But that's sort of the unseen that is difficult. But right now, I think the trend doesn't look real good, and that this raising, they're talking about 3 or 4 more times this year to raise interest rates. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think reality will set in, and they say, oh, well, it looks like the market doesn't like this, and they'll go back to removing this token effort, which means hardly anything of a 0.25%, and thinking that's going to solve our problems. It's not going to do that.
I know we've got a lot of charts today, but you mentioned military spending counting as GDP. We have a great chart here that we got off of Zero Hedge of Trump's proposed budget, the cuts and the plus-ups. Yeah. And look at this, the cuts, big cuts, this is what he claims: health and human services, AID, education, HUD, agriculture, all good, all good. Then you go down toward the bottom, Look at the defense budget. Look at the gray line.
Yes,
it's incredible.
And, you know, the only way the Congress can get away with this is you have to terrify the people, scare them to death that we're about to be attacked, like Saddam Hussein's coming. He's going to drop a nuclear missile on us. And now we have to be terrified, and that's the name of the game, and they work on this all the time. Unfortunately, you know, I can't think of anything real positive to say about that because the cuts aren't going to happen. And the people who want those cuts are very sincere. The people who voted for Trump and a lot of conservatives in the Congress want it. But it's not going to happen. And those spending, the spending will happen. That's the way it's been for a long time. And there's one factor on why they could possibly continue to do this for a while longer until the whole thing implodes. And that is, there's a Federal Reserve System. Without a Federal Reserve System and sound money, you're limited. You can't print money out of thin air. It restricts the politician. The politician can't buy votes by going to his district and say, what do you need? Oh, you need to build this part for the F-35 and this gives you military jobs. You won't cut that, will you? No, we're going to build more F-35s and more helicopters. I see they're building the most expensive helicopter ever now. So everybody will say, that's good for jobs, isn't it? And that circulates the money, and that is all good. So I would say that this isn't going to work. The spending cuts won't occur, and the spending increases will, and we're going to continue to limp along.
So no guns without the butter.
There you go. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. I think this is fascinating information and a subject because the Federal Reserve is key and it's very important. We have a lot of support, you know, for Campaign for Liberty, for auditing the Fed. And it is that function, which was started in 1913, which has undermined our economic system. It has undermined, you know, the whole process. And it destroyed the gold standard, and it ushered in an age of exuberance, of printing money and running up deficits. But believe me, if it were so easy that all we had to do was get monopoly control, not only on our own monetary system by people who want to spend money, but on actual control worldwide by running the reserve currency of the world and pretending that we're spreading American goodness. As long as that exists, they're going to keep doing this. But it is results from this fallacy that creating money has something to do with creating wealth. It doesn't. Creating wealth means people have to work, they have to save, and they have to invest, and they have to suffer consequences if they make mistakes. And you cannot have runaway welfare and runaway warfare and think a country can get wealthy. This is what has destroyed most nations and most empires throughout history, is the destruction of the monetary unit as well as overextension in foreign policy. And believe me, we're facing the consequence of that type of policy. So hopefully we will wake up some people. I know on my travels that I meet more and more people, a lot of young people who know exactly what's going on, but their voices aren't heard and they're not getting to express themselves. All they want to do is show the Bernie Sanders rallies and said, every young person in this country now wants socialism. Well, I don't believe that. There's a lot of people there, and it's a growing number, who want their freedom back and want to take care of themselves, and they want to mind their own business, and they would like to see a system of sound money, and they'd like to see a system and a policy where we didn't go around the world looking for wars to fight. Those conditions would usher in a period of time of peace and prosperity, which certainly should be the goal of all Americans. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. Now, with the hike going up, it really was not anything to do with our GDP getting better, our economy getting better, people doing better off. A lot of the growth you see, they always want to champion the growth. But what you got to understand about the growth is it's a recovery. We're still not anywhere near where we were when they lowered the rate hikes, or lowered the rates. And hiking it back up, what does that, you know, follow in the new administration? It really follows the defense budget. Um, they see, hey, government's going to start spending a crap load of money, and because it's in the defense, sector, oh, it'll have a little bit of everything, AI, robots, um, you know, it's going to have manufacturing. They're going, look at how good this will be. Well, it will be for the companies that deal in that, but there's still a lot of industries that might have nothing to do with that. Um, your favorite clothing brand out there probably isn't making something. Not saying they aren't. There might be some companies that are, but I don't think every clothing line out there is also making things for the Defense Department. So, you know, what does this really do? Well, it's going to raise our debt. Um, it's going to raise prices on things. And again, we're not back to where we should be. When you look at how the Fed operates, it's always a after, effect. After something happens, then they go in to try to affect the market. And well, usually by then it's too late to be able to do the measures they want. There is no, 100%. It's probably more around, this is probably 25, 30% likely this will help at all. So, what's going to probably end up happening is the wage gap, the class status gap will get bigger again. Because prices are going to go up. People that are left in the middle class are probably upper middle class. In that sense, what you'll probably have, because our middle class is diminished already, is that upper middle class that's still left, that they will probably end up, they have value when it comes to their job. They're not going to be, the person that manages a whole bunch of McDonald's or something that are, chain owner, one of these chains. You're district manager, you're able to multitask, handle all this, you take on a workload. You're probably valuable enough to them. You'll hold value to that company. But the cashier make a minimum wage kiosk, robot hamburger flippers, what will come next. And what this will do is, again, it will make that gap bigger. And that's very dangerous. You start taking that ladder away, which it's already been, chipped away at, run by run. There's almost no ladder left. We start moving into a society movies are made out of. And unfortunately, we don't have superhumans right now that tend to be on our side. Um, we don't have magical powers. So, I don't see a whole bunch of heroes. Um, I see enslavement, but that doesn't mean that's what's coming. I don't want to be fear mongering, but again, how far do we allow these politicians to get away with this? There are politicians, very few, but politicians in Congress that believe in freedom still. They might not be, as libertarian, or they might even be more libertarian than you when it comes to looking at the idea of freedom. Um, a lot of them do believe in the Constitution, which I do to a point. I believe definitely where we're at today, and in the time that the Declaration of Independence and Constitution and Bill of Rights were all written. I think that is a good stepping stone away from, a dictatorship or, this oligarchy that you tend to see and tyrants. And I don't see the Constitution as an end all if you're really in search of freedom. But if you want to look at where we're at today, if you want to look at where the colonists were the time these documents were written, you see a stepping stone towards freedom, a freer society where ideas can be explored, where inventions could be made, where you weren't stifled by the government. Now, there's flaws, and execution was very flawed. But there's ideas definitely in the Bill of Rights, definitely in the Declaration of Independence. There's things in there that if you want to look for what counts you, do you have these things as a free person? You're told that you're free. Are these rights, whether you believe them to be God's rights or natural right, do you have these rights? Has government been restricted from abridging any of these rights? And we look at where we're at now. Now, whether Trump's sincere or whatever, pushing for this Obamacare light, that to me doesn't say, hey, I'm sincere about repealing Obamacare. But, he mentioned to replace. Well, I don't know if there should be a, full replacement. There really should only be one that, insurance companies can, trade, within the borders of the country, not a state. It rates are already going up. There's insurance companies that are, this is too much for them. Obamacare is not going to keep them in business. And if you went back to the way it was and then added a clause that says that insurance companies are now able to also trade, over state lines, you would have more insurance companies. Therefore, you would have more competition. Therefore, prices would start dropping. What they were proposing, Obamacare Light. Let's just kind of cut a couple little things here and there, and yep, that's a whole new bill. Yep. No. I have one here I wanted to cover. And this was actually posted 2 days ago, but this is at fee.org, Foundation for Economic Education. Ryan Care is worse than Obamacare. So, they claim by cutting out, hey, we'll just cut, right here, we'll cut the edge over here, and look, it's a whole new bill, when really it's just Obamacare Light, because they trimmed a couple of things off. Well, when they trimmed those couple of things off, were they things that helped the Obamacare work better? Or did they take Obamacare and make it worse? And this is Nathan Keeble, again, from fee.org, Foundation for Economic Education. Says after 7 years, Republicans finally have the chance to fulfill their promise of repealing Obamacare. With the Republicans in control of the legislative and executive branches of the federal government, the only thing standing in their way is themselves, apparently a formidable foe. Titled the American Health Care Act, the Republican establishment unveiled their plan to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, and it was quickly met with controversy among members of their own party. For his part, Trump has intervened to threaten any lawmaker who opposes the establishment. He made it very clear he's all in on this legislation, said Representative Kevin Brady. After a rough meeting with the president, it was a central pillar of his election and arguably swung the election in his favor. He had one job. He is now using his power to do something very different. Senator Rand Paul has chosen to refer to the AHCA as Obamacare Light. It's an apt name as the bill keeps in place the majority of the Obamacare, namely the supposedly popular provisions. These huge compromises have caused Senator Paul and members of the Freedom Caucus to openly oppose the AHCA, and with good reason. By picking and choosing the parts of Obamacare they think are politically expedient instead of the full repeal they promise, the GOP's proposed bill will exaggerate the ACA's problems instead of fixing them. How Obamacare broke health insurance. To understand the problems with the AHCA, one has to understand some of Obamacare's main provisions, the reason they exist, and how they all fit together. The original purpose of the ACA was to provide insurance coverage to those who had pre-existing conditions. The first step taken to achieve this goal was simply to prevent insurers from rejecting these people. However, if the ACA's architects had stopped here, insurers would simply have offered plans to cancer patients, for instance, that had $1 million dollar premiums, and their goal would have gone unaccomplished. This potential loophole led to the provision that gave us the community rating system, which forced insurance companies to charge everyone essentially the same price for similar plans, with a small amount of leeway given factors like age. Community ratings brought about their own problems. However, with insurers forced to accept everyone and unable to charge more for pre-existing conditions, people would have no reason to buy insurance until they became ill. Further spurred the necessary rise in premium. Healthy people would begin to refrain from buying insurance, forcing premiums to rise more, and so on until the health insurance industry failed entirely. Referring to the sequence of events, free market economists coined the now famous death spiral term. The death spiral is obviously very bad, and it prompted the most infamous of Obamacare's features, the individual mandate. The individual mandate created a tax penalty for those who didn't hold an approved plan for the entire year. By forcing everyone into the health insurance pool, the ACA's framers hoped to avoid the death spiral, with subsidies and other mechanisms added into the bill to further encourage the purchase of insurance. The death spiral happens anyway. At this point, the ACA's architects were pleased with their work. They had thought through the consequences of their legislation more thoroughly than most. After all, however, they failed to consider the same factor, which is the ultimate failure of all central planners: their necessary ignorance of market conditions and how best to handle them. The individual mandate failed to coerce enough healthy people to purchase insurance in order to cover the newly added ill. As insurance pools have worsened and increased demand for health care without a subsequent rise in doctors and hospitals has driven prices up. Premiums have grown massively. The death spiral is occurring despite Obamacare's attempts to prevent it. Insurance companies are hemorrhaging money and going out of business. Some areas now have only one supplier, with 16 counties in my own state of Tennessee having no provider at all. The ACA, like all attempts at central planning, is a failure. At best, the individual mandate's only effect has been a somewhat slower death spiral. The AHCA's major blunder. Obamacare is a clear example of Ludwig von Mises' famous adage: the government interventions necessitate more and more interventions to fix the problems they create. The fact that the ACA's provisions are all intertwined is also clear. To avoid an even bigger disaster, all of them need to be repealed at once. But for reasons that are very likely political, the Republican establishment has chosen a weak and compromised bill which keeps the requirements for pre-existing conditions and community ratings, but does away with the individual mandate. In other words, the ACHA removes Obamacare's funding mechanism, but keeps the requirements that made it necessary in the first place. In the individual mandate's place is a mandatory 30% surcharge payable to the insurance companies for those who go without coverage for a prolonged period of time and then choose to purchase another plan. This surcharge is wholly insufficient to fulfill its purpose, whereas the individual mandate punished people for not purchasing insurance. The surcharge punishes people who have decided they do want to buy it. It provides people with very little incentive to continue paying their huge premiums while they're healthy, insurance providers simply couldn't survive in such a distorted environment. The GOP sacrifice of principles for votes will likely result in the loss of both. If the ACHA passes, which it won't, we know that now, as is, the health insurance market would collapse in an even more rapid death spiral, and this time the Republican Party will be on the receiving end of the political blowback. Indeed, the ACHA's inevitability failure would create the perfect political environment for a push towards a single-payer system. The left undoubtedly framed the ensuing chaos as to blame deregulation for the free market, when it truly lies in Obamacare and the Republican Party's spinelessness to propose a proper repeal. You can read the rest of that. He goes into free markets and are the solution, which I've kind of covered. And, calling this a repeal, it really kind of, don't let them play you for stupid. They're trying to play you for stupid. I know most people aren't falling for it. I read an article, I think, where was that? I think it was off of Bloomberg, that Trump, even though, has come out and, said that he likes Paul and think, he tried hard, behind the scenes, the aides are not happy with the bill that was even proposed. They blame Ryan. Now, will this hurt his position as House Speaker? I don't think it will, for the simple fact that the establishment is going to keep their people in a position like that. I just don't see, them taking him out and putting another one in. Now they're going to go for tax cuts probably next. That's what Trump is pointed to. And I'm not going to be surprised if it's just going to be in our BS, bill. Where, how many years do we do this? People go, oh, we got an outsider now. He sided with, Ryan. You can't call him an outsider anymore. He's on the inside. Now what do you do? Other radio hosts, other, the supporters out there. What do you do now? Do you deny that, he's siding with the people he said that he was going to weed out? When you do have all these liberty people that they're the ones that end up standing up against this, and we don't see him trying to reach out to these people. And don't, just because he brought them in and basically told them that, we need to vote for this, we need to vote for this, we need to vote for this, that was somehow reaching out. That he gave an ultimatum. He basically tried to play the bully game. In a way, it was kind of a bluff, but it also, was a bully game. Now, I don't really care because, mature and grown people can deal with it, and they did. They still stood against it. You can try to bully all you want, you know, it's not going to get you anywhere. We're looking at the facts. The facts don't change because you think we need to pass it. The facts are that was Obamacare light. And I think if you truly think Obamacare is a bad thing, that you would be glad this didn't pass. Because that article basically, you know, covered it. It would have brought Obamacare down a lot more. Okay. I want to get to a couple other things. I just need to get some of this down. Sorry, guys. I don't keep my tabs open anymore. Try to save everything. I want to get into a little bit of censorship going on. And I've talked about this in previous broadcasts that, you know, they've already been doing this. They kind of go after the smaller people, and they've been working their way up. Many people have been on Facebook, you know. We've already had to deal with a lot of this, all the way back to, you know, the Ron Paul campaigns. Many Ron Paul supporters were banned and, you know, suspended for a week or whatever for posting just articles about Ron Paul. Post them, share it to a couple people or friends or whatever, and bam. I personally know that one person, he posted it to his page, posted it to one other person's page. And as soon as it, you know, posted, he refreshed and bam, he had a, you know, warning that he was spamming. And if I remember right, it was from a mainstream site, so it wasn't, or I can't remember. I think it was mainstream. Can't be 100% sure on that. Okay. I got two clips here I want to play. One's going to be from We Are Change, and he's going to cover how not to be restricted, censored, or demonetized on YouTube. So we'll get into that one, but first I want to cover one from AMTV, and this is about Google wanting to censor, and we'll kind of get into that, but I'm going to play this clip first. We'll talk a little bit about this one, and then we'll get into the other one. So let's go ahead and dive into this one from AMTV, Christopher Green. Here we go.
And you mainstream media are losers. You're losers. Hillary Clinton, you're a loser. You lost. Get over it. Mainstream media, you're a loser. You're losing, and you've lost. Get over it. More good news from the evil empire. Google to censor what they call controversial and extremist content. Google to censor controversial content, which is really just an attack on free speech, of which we've been over ad nauseum. According to the Wall Street Journal, Google steps up effort to keep ads away from controversial content, like to what you're tuning into, because it's too controversial. And God forbid we have a free press. God forbid freedom of speech be allowed in this country, because, again, folks, you live in a totalitarian police state and take it up the ass on a regular basis. God forbid somebody think differently. God forbid somebody speak the unofficial narrative. God forbid somebody veer off the teleprompter and speak from his gut and his heart, because, after all, that's dangerous. And all of you are controversial and extremists and terrorists and witches, and also, clearly, enemies of the police state. Not the state, but enemies of the police state. And you must be tarred and feathered promptly and burnt at the stake, according to the U.S. federal government. And these totalitarian corporate giants, cancerous companies like McDonald's and others, that are pulling their multi-billion-dollar funds and advertising from Google and the parent company Alphabet to pressure them to shut down not just controversial content, or what they dub with their decided definition, which is all it is, extremist content, but essentially shut down freedom of speech, which is exactly what they want and how they want it. Go back to sleep, sheep. Go put your head in the sand, ostriches, and don't think. Don't challenge your system. Don't challenge your education. Don't challenge your indoctrination. And do not, God forbid, challenge anything these people are telling you. Don't think. Thinking is conspiracy. Thinking is controversial. Alphabet unit acts after backlash over ads displayed next to fake news or terrorist videos. Targets include content that attack or harass. Ooh, so scary. Well, we better dump all free speech. Yep, that's right. Get rid of all of it. Yep, sounds good. But again, most Americans don't even like free speech because it ruffles their feathers of their illusion that they live. The illusion that, well, they've been sold. The lie. Do what you're told, sheep. Sit in your little cubicle, sheep. Oh, yeah. You'll get to do what you want later in life. Yeah, that's right. Save for your retirement as we loot your retirement accounts with the next financial crisis. Let's keep order to our society. We don't want people thinking for themselves or perhaps acting out. That would be dangerous. What would George Soros and others do if they couldn't control you, the peon, the bawling little bitch in their eyes? What would they do? How would they amass and accumulate their vast amounts of wealth in perpetuity? How would they do it? How?
Okay, I'm going to stop there. Now, these, corporations, these are the same corporations. You got to think, every commercial you see during mainstream media, sponsors of, little special gifts and things they do. All these corporations basically are funding mainstream media. Where has alternative media started beating mainstream media? On the web. That's where alternative media is. Well, now these corporations want control of the web. And if you let them get it, unless you go along with what they want you to say, just like the mainstream media does, If you're not willing to go along with that, then you're not going to have a place if they're able to do this. And I'm not a fan of Google. I'm not a fan of Google because I don't trust them. I don't like how they talk, what they, propose, what they believe in. They say they don't want to be evil, do no evil or whatever their little phrase is, but by thinking that they're not doing any evil, they are doing evil because they're being arrogant to the world around them. People can have good intentions and do the wrong things. There's a saying out there that love can kill. You can try so hard because you love so much, but you don't know what you're doing. You don't know the right things. You can't predict the future. And you, in turn, create something that you don't either have control over anymore, or it also the factor of absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think we're on the verge of that if we allow all this to go through with the the controlling of the internet by these mega corporations, running, the social media websites, the video websites, it's way too easy for them to get super rich off of this. And then that absolute power tends to absolutely corrupt them, even if they believe they're doing good. They're so detached. And they also don't understand or respect individuals' rights. They see themselves above that old, that Constitution, we're not government. We're bigger than government. We have more knowledge. We have more information. We know everything about everybody. Wasn't it the FBI that was trying to force Apple to open an iPhone? Who was holding the cards there for the most part? I want to play a short clip, and this was from the Blaze Glenn Beck program interview with Eric Schmidt. I'm going to play this here, and I'll cover that as long as it takes off.
Well,
if I can get it.
Forever. I happen to disagree on what life is.
We want him to be right.
Yeah. He's taking all kinds of vitamins and everything else. He believes he just has to make it to about 2030 and he'll live forever. I happen to disagree on what life is.
We want him to be right.
Yeah. Let me start with this. How would you define life?
Well, I think we all understand that life is basically defined as consciousness. Right, that ultimately consciousness is the unique thing that humans have.
So if you can make a robot conscious, it's life?
Maybe not. We'll have to decide. But consciousness is more than an analytical process. It's more than a verbal process. It's something that is not understood. It's never been understood by philosophers, and scientists today cannot explain consciousness.
If Ray is right, because this is one of the things he's working on, if he's right, and you can download somebody, let's say a soldier on the battlefield, and he's still got it, but he's lost everything else, and you could download his essence and put it into a working machine. Have you created life or saved a life?
These are the questions of science fiction. The good news about your question...
But it's not science fiction.
But what you're describing is many, many, many years from now.
2030, according to the guy who works for you.
Well, I will be a little bit more pessimistic.
2040.
It's a long, long time. And the reason is that as we understand the parallelism of the brain, which presumably is our consciousness, it will be many, many years before we can simulate what you're describing. What we can do...
You should talk to Ray.
I have.
Does he know you're this pessimistic on his work?
I'm not that pessimistic on his work. I'm a supporter of his work.
All right.
It doesn't mean that 2030 is the date. Have you ever encountered a product that slips?
Oh, I know. I'm still waiting for my flying car. But...
Well, we're actually working on that.
But I also know why you hired him, because I know his record. I mean, I read The Age of Spiritual Machines when it first came out.
Ray is a truly brilliant innovator and futurist. The reality is we've got to do stuff step by step. One of the core questions in this area is whether it'll be possible to do something called the Turing test, where you can actually determine whether a person or a computer are one and the same. You literally ask questions of the computer and the person. Many people believe that within a couple decades we'll be able to have computers that are as smart or as dumb as humans.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to do that, by the way, the computer wouldn't have to have a perfect memory because it's trying to simulate people. So it's a more complicated question than you might imagine.
If you can, and you call them in your book, you call when you could up a memory prosthetics. Explain memory prosthetics.
Again, is there some way in which we can recreate some understanding, allow you to consult it, get it into you? We don't know. These are speculation.
You guys sound like I read your book.
I know.
You're not as like, well, that's crazy talk in the book. I mean, I don't understand.
These are not current Google X research projects.
No, I know that, but.
So you're hearing in this interview that, you know, they're looking at these. They're far off. Don't worry, they're far off. Yeah, don't worry. Well, far off for you or me, I'm sure. Far off for these people, I'm not so sure. Because even though he says it's not part of Google X projects right now, because they haven't made it that far, they're not quite there yet. That's what I would question. And I really want to find this other excerpt out of Glenn Beck. I found one that I wanted to cover, but there was another one that I really wanted to cover. I'm going to play this one, and then we'll get into another one that he covered in the interview.
Let me see if I can find it. Social robots. And you go into talking a little bit about, and which is really great, how, you know, with fMRIs, you're going to be able to replace limbs on people. You're going to be able to do...
But the discoveries ahead of us in genetics and biology and so forth will make our lives much longer, much safer, and much healthier. Right? So, for example, building a genetics database allows us to give you personalized medicine. Cost of genetic sequencing is in the process of falling to $100 a sequence. It cost $10 million to do the first one. Now it takes $100. It's just phenomenal. So you'll go in, you have some problem, they'll do a genetic sequence, and they'll say, this is the best drug to fix your problem that we know about.
Okay, so let me go back to let me use this as a jumping off point, but I want to go back to the social robots. You bring up medicine, and you make great case on what can happen. However, the rest of the world, including the United States, is now headed for socialized medicine. We're headed to a single payer system. It is anybody with half a brain knows that's where we're headed. You are suggesting in the book disruption of the best kind. However, who disrupts when you have a single payer system? Who's really disrupting? How does all of that work when you have a government say, no, you'll do it this way? So how does all of that work?
So, let me make a case that for us to get through this, you've got to have some spaces for innovation and disruption. You've got to have, let's say you're right, 49 states are one way, a 50th state has to be a different way. You've got to have a place where the new ideas can be tried, where new approaches, where the regulators don't clomp on everything down. We've got a problem of joblessness in America and in the Western world, and computers are beginning to replace some of the people's normal activities. Computers replace robots are replacing people on the assembly line, that kind of stuff. Where do those people go? They need jobs. Where do those jobs come from? If you look at the math, they come from new, fast-growing companies, disruptive of one kind or another. It's true in technology. By the way, in other areas, in oil and gas. The whole fracking revolution created a huge number of jobs because technology enabled those jobs. We need to make sure that whatever governments we have, and this is not just in the U.S., but especially in Europe, that there's a space for innovators, that there's literally room for them to build new companies, create new wealth, create new employees, and so forth. Frankly, you've done it here on your show, right? It's a classic example.
So, they have these big elaborate ideas, these crazy ideas, I believe. There's legitimate things, and the problem is they want to be the gatekeepers of these things, which then in turn doesn't, it's not going to bid well for you. It just won't. It's going to play in their hands. And I tried. Hold on. Okay. I try to find the clip that he talked about it, but Glenn had brought up, and I'm not a big Glenn Beck fan or nothing like that, but I do catch his show, and he's had some interesting guests on, and those are the ones I really tune in for, like when he had the two Google execs on, and you heard Eric Schmidt doing a lot of talking, but he brought up Google trying to be basically the gatekeeper of the search engine. They want to basically have that monopoly on that market. You don't hear anybody go, let's go Bing it, even though I think Bing is decent. Again, I don't trust any of the big search engines. I try to look for the anonymous ones that search multiple search engines. Otherwise, things get buried and you never find them. Which, even with those search engines, you have problems trying to find things just because they bring up everything. There's definitely no middle ground. but they're getting better. A lot of them are newer, but you know, with Alphabet Inc. and Google X and all these different things, you know, Glenn Beck brought up the simple fact, if you're going to be that knowledge bank, basically, you're going to have everything, you'll be able to find and do everything. He goes, well, what if I'm paraphrasing all this, but basically, what if I'm an inventor and I want to search if there's a patent on something? You know, knowing you have the resources, and I think it had to do with, maybe intertwining with government. You have the resources. What's to say you don't like the idea so much that you go, yeah, there's a patent on it, and file it. What's to say you can't get to the patent office first, or direct line right to the government? I need a patent on this now. And Eric Smith said something to the extent is, we wouldn't do that. We do no evil. Okay, you create a system that gives the ability for something like that to be able to happen, and you claim, well, I'm righteous enough, it won't happen. Well, you must believe in, that you're going to reach eternal life and have eternal control over this company to be able to say something like that. Otherwise, you're really just arrogant, because you can't guarantee who's going to be in charge. And with the power you create, again, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we see the fallback coming from the corporations, but we're also slowly seeing fallback coming from a lot of users. Google will basically have to, and this is probably how they'll play it out, they will have to raise more money from the ads, meaning they'll get, bigger payouts for these big corporations playing ads, because they're going to have a lower, channel number. They'll censor people. They'll do what they need to. Either, comply with what they want you to push, the political correctness, or you get kicked off, and therefore the ones that are left that go along will be fewer. Therefore, the money that'll come in will have to be more. Then the people left will benefit from that and keep pushing propaganda, basically. And you best believe that a lot of the big corporate networks will be on there. They're probably not going anywhere. But, every time you see this, what comes out of this is other platforms that give that freedom again. And I think we're starting to see it. Now, I do want to get into this one from We Are Change. And this one is how to not be restricted, censored, or demonetized on YouTube. And I think this is very important if you're active on YouTube. So we'll get into this.
Yes, I am peeved because from the information I'm getting, other YouTubers who interview me and put their name in their videos automatically get demonetized. Yes, I don't understand what the hell's happening here, but in this video, we're going to explain to you how that's happening, the consistent problems with YouTube, the censorship, and what other people need to look out for with their YouTube careers. Now, we're living in an amazing day and age where Americans now have fewer TVs on average than they did in 2009. We're seeing the trust in mainstream media go down dramatically. We know people will believe what the media tells them to believe, and right now we are seeing a resurgence of the decentralization of information as the internet will soon overtake television in time spent by media. This is an incredible, beautiful time that we're seeing the repercussions from, with people being disillusioned by left-right politics and actually critically thinking for themselves, going online and getting real independent information without any bias. Understanding this is the main reason why I'm on YouTube working as an independent journalist and not for all the other mainstream media companies that try to acquire me. But here's the problem. Many YouTubers who have interviewed me or put me in their videos and put my name in their tags have gotten their videos demonetized. This one is from a podcast that I did in Chiang Mai, Thailand, about being a digital nomad and traveling. This also happened to my second friend in India, where he filmed a vlog, and the same thing happened to him. Automatically, his video was demonetized because he put my name in the tag. His video was put up for review. He deleted my name, and then automatically demonetization came back on those videos. So am I blacklisted? Is my name automatically going to have anyone who interviews me or talks about me demonetized? Because it seems like that's exactly what's happening, and YouTube is not responding to any of the questions that we have for them. Myself and my YouTube manager have made multiple attempts to contact YouTube to ask them what the hell's going on, and surprise, there's no freaking answer. But I do get their notifications that they're demonetizing my videos because for some reason they're not advertiser friendly. I'm also seeing my YouTube numbers go dramatically down when my likes ratio is extremely high. And compared to other videos, that ratio makes no sense at all. They used to allow me to review videos for monetization, but right now they're just cutting it off for some of them. And now we have the latest controversy with restrictive mode that we've been hearing about all on social media, which is a YouTube opt-in setting that allows people to screen content that they prefer, that they don't want others in their family to stumble across while enjoying YouTube. And guess what? Independent news, totally restricted. No videos available. My channel, completely gone on restricted mode. CNN, the crap, criminal, congested, conniving, conscrupulous, cockroach news network, CNN, totally available on restricted mode. And this is the same news network that had a host eat human brains on their own television show in order to get ratings. They resorted to cannibalism in order to get hits, and it worked. I watched it twice. It was disgusting. But YouTube's restricted mode doesn't see an issue with that. And there's been an uproar because many people who have LGBT content on their YouTube channels have been blocked with this restricted mode. And because of the backlash, YouTube is apologizing and then going back in and making sure that some of the content is not restricted. But what about me, you buttholes? I cover the same topics as CNN does, only I tell you the truth about them in a very similar format that they do. Why are these fake news lunatics allowed still to be seen when they're eating human brains for views on television? Now, The Guardian explains exactly what's happening with YouTube, which of course has to pander to their advertisers, who of course don't want their ads shown along racist or violent or hateful videos. And some of them have pulled out. And YouTube is a private company and they could do what they want. But it should be known by everyone that their pandering to these advertisements is destroying its core base of creators. And a lot of creators, not just me, are getting hit with demonetization, leaving many of us disillusioned, pissed off, and angry at YouTube because, as a company, they don't even explain what's happening to you. They don't tell you what's bad. They don't tell you what's profane. They don't tell you why they demonetized the video. They don't tell you about their algorithm. They don't tell you what you can and cannot do. They just screw you. Some people more than others, by making their name alone a factor in demonetizing them. I understand. My job is to question authority. That's why I'm here. That's why you guys are watching me. That's why you guys are supporting me on Patreon. And I have done that against very powerful politicians and corporate heads and bankers and anyone else out there who does injustice to the people. So I understand I made a lot of enemies, which I think would explain what's happening to my channel now. But YouTube, at least if you're going to screw me and all the other content creators, at least Tell us how and why. Haven't done that, and with many people like myself depending on the income from YouTube to continue my existence here, you become a crappy company that sucks major webbo. So again, in conclusion here, if you want to be a successful YouTuber, not be put on restricted mode, mysteriously have your videos demonetized, this is what you have to do. Stay in line, you don't ask any questions, you obey authority, you become a corporatist, sellout, shill, and you eat some human freaking brains on national television. That's exactly what YouTube is telling us. Again, to deal with this new level of censorship, you should know that we have a full running news organization with a number of journalists and editors on wearechange.org producing new content for you every single day. What you could do is you could sign up on our email list so you could bypass all the bullcrap, censorship, malarkey, hooey, and get information from us directly one-on-one without a butthole company standing in the way of us. And most importantly, the people who are still continuing this operation by donating on patreon.com/wearechange, thank you from the bottom of my heart, because if it truly wasn't for you, I would not be here. And in this
So that's We Are Change, wearechange.org, We Are Change on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. Now, he points out the same thing I point out. You want to be able to make money on YouTube now. Just go along with political correctness, what the corporations want to push, a lot of leftist ideology. So yeah, you go ahead and just go along with the system. Don't talk out against it. Whatever mainstream media is doing, just parrot them, and you can make some money, or do dumb things. Something that I don't know, be a teen mom on YouTube. I'm sure that'll get some. Go along with the political correctness, and you'll make money because they'll keep you around. But something's going to come out of this. Something is going to come out of this where you're going to have more of the freedom companies, the people in companies that support, the freedom of speech. Look at a lot of this and can't believe it. Might have friends that make money on YouTube now getting censored, put on the restricted list. So we have all this going on, and what's going to happen is going to have to be another, company or, streaming service or something that comes out of YouTube's ashes. Someone creates something better than YouTube, and gives people the opportunity to make decent money doing it. And I don't see it too far off, because you're not going to see Google change. Google has set out a plan and a path, and they are bound, determined to get there. And the collusion between, companies that are under the same umbrella company as Google, and the intertwining with government and the Defense Department, even though I wish they would stop using that term, because we have plenty of defense and we wouldn't have to raise defense spending if we were only worried about defense. And hopefully we can have more companies that but the system, to say, and give, Google, Facebook, and, any corporation that decides to go along with the political correctness, never mind facts. So hopefully we see that soon, because I think we're in desperate need of that. You know, we've seen companies fall, but we have become complacent with the media platforms that are out there, and now that they got us, they are now weeding out what they don't like. And again, it's their company and they can do that. But, you know, who's going to fall in line just to kind of go along with something that we've become accustomed to? Or are we going to have enough people go, you know, once these platforms come out, I'm on top of it? And I've seen, you know, people talk about, you know, there's these platforms. The one thing a lot of those other platforms don't have in common with the big ones that are out there right now is, one, capabilities, and two, ease of use. And that's what I'm talking about. Something that can compete with these platforms that make it just as easy with many of the options, or a couple, you know, majority of the options that these platforms have, with maybe a couple options that these platforms haven't came up with it yet. Okay, let me see. Where are we at in the broadcast? Okay. Okay. Now, I haven't talked about this person for a while, but journalist Barrett Brown on prison leakers and private intelligence agencies. This from Reason TV or Reason.com. Check them out.
Yeah, Robert Smith's life is over. So when I say his life is over, I don't say I'm gonna go kill him. But I'm gonna ruin his life and look into his fucking kids.
Barrett Brown spent more than 4 years in prison in no small part because of this YouTube video, in which he appears to threaten an FBI agent. But how did it even get to this point? Remember the hacker group Anonymous? The guys who wear Guy Fawkes masks and release ominous videos threatening to take down government agencies, corporations, and religions like Scientology?
We are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forgive.
Well, Brown rose to semi-fame when the media characterized him, not entirely to his liking, as the spokesman for Anonymous. It would be his association with hackers that would later land him in federal prison. But Barrett Brown is actually not a hacker. He's more of a hybrid activist and investigative journalist. He first ran into trouble after he launched a crowdsourced research platform devoted to investigating the private intelligence sector. Think a privatized version of the NSA that counters perceived enemies of large corporations and governments. After a major email hack, Brown and his team uncovered and publicized a conspiracy amongst several of these private intelligence firms to, among other things, attack and discredit journalists. What exactly landed Brown in prison is a bit complicated, and we'll get to it later. But what's important to know for now is that Brown just got out in November and is already working as a journalist again, covering the city council for D Magazine in Dallas, Texas. But as is always the case with Barrett Brown, there might be more here than meets the eye. He says he's already working on a project to disrupt things in Dallas and way beyond. We met up with Barrett at the D Magazine headquarters to talk about his time in prison, the state of the private intelligence sector, and to get his read on America's current political situation and the role hackers and leakers have played in it.
Barrett, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Could you just give us an overview of what your impression of federal prison was?
It was very educational to be within the confines of the government, to actually be there 24 hours a day, watching government officials walk around, conduct themselves. It gave me additional perspective on how these people think, how an institution operates, in contrast to how it's supposed to operate.
What were some of your observations about the prison guards and other federal employees?
They'll do whatever's convenient at any given time. I spent about 6 months altogether in the SHU, in the Special Housing Unit, the Hole, as it's more popularly known. A couple of those occasions entirely without justification. It was known that I was in there without justification. I was being retaliated against by a particular administration official, the assistant warden in this case, and these fellows, the staff there, who generally approved of my work. They all read my column. They tend to actually have you might call like sort of right libertarian views to some extent. Nonetheless, will happily confine a journalist in the Hole. They will do whatever's asked of them, and that's important to know. It's important to keep in mind that, you know, we need to know about the apparatus we have, the personal apparatus we have in this country. We need to know what cops will do, what ex-military people will do, what bureaucrats will do, even when they don't agree with it. When we're going into a period of potential disarray, civic disarray, as we are now, we need to be thinking about those factors.
A lot of civil libertarians and other critics of our prison system believe that the SHU, solitary confinement, is inhumane, cruel punishment. Do you think that that's a fair characterization based on your experience?
Solitary confinement has been shown by countless studies, you know, to have a certain effect on people's mentality, on their emotional life. I was very rarely in solitary confinement as such. It's more common to have a SHU set up where you have two people living in a cell. They do that for a number of reasons, one of which is space, one of which is to make suicides more difficult. And people can get used to anything. That's the interesting thing about being a human being, is that, you know, and we know this from history, is that people have to get used to sometimes anything. So I can't say I suffered a great deal. I tried to take advantage of the situation as much as possible. I got some of my best work done in the SHU. But, you know, that's not possible for a lot of people. Not everybody has something they can attend to while they're held back there. And oftentimes they're held back there far longer than they're supposed to, even according to BOP's own policy. I've seen it happen many, many times. That's one of several overlapping issues in the U.S. prison system that need to be addressed. The fact that Obama had to come out and forbid children from being held in the SHU or in solitary is telling about our society. That's not something that should have had to be done just now. And that's something that should have been addressed a long time ago.
And you mentioned that you were put in there often without explanation. At some point, your email access was suspended, you believe, for communicating with a journalist about corruption in the Bureau of Prisons. You discovered through some FOIA requests that you were classified as an inmate of greatest concern. What does that mean, and why do you think you were one?
I was listed as a hacker, which not even the DOJ claims I'm a hacker. I think the reasoning on that is it would have been kind of embarrassing to say, this guy's a journalist, he's writing about us, just be wary of him. You can't really make that explicit, a situation like that. And of course, the reason I was actually aware of that classification was I was told by a staff member, contrary to policy, because I am a journalist. And one of my tactics, as opposed to hacking, is actually to develop sources among people who are unhappy with the institutions they work for. And that happen time and again within the prison system. That needs to be kept in mind both from people who actually support these institutions. It needs to be kept in mind by those of us who tend to oppose these institutions, that there are fractures there that can be taken advantage of. They're not thinking as a Borg. There's individuals here who disagree with a great deal of what they do and what their government does, but nonetheless continue to work for the government. Those people generally aren't going to be very useful. They tend not to have a strong moral center, almost by definition. But these are all things that are going to come into play more and more as our civil society continues to fracture.
Barrett Brown's arrest, like many of the more dramatic moments in his life, was caught on camera because it happened in the middle of a video chat he was leading.
Oh, is Barrett getting fucking raided by the FBI? Holy!
Could you just describe what actually happened that night?
We're doing a Project PM video chat, as I did most evenings at that point. I heard a rustling at the door, opened it, and I see some sort of very confusing scene of a guy with a big metal shield and a faceplate, and there's yelling, and they came in, knocked me over. My arm was under my chest. This SWAT team fellow dug his knee into my back. You can hear me screaming on the video. My ribs were being pressed into my organs. And you can hear the audio of me, explaining that to him, and that I can't, as he's requesting, move my arm, put it behind my back because he's pressing down on my spine. They took me to the federal building. I had some injuries to my ribs that lasted for a few months. I had a bottom bunk pass because of that. I wasn't able to climb into a top bunk for a while. And, that's about, I think, probably how a raid generally happens.
I'm trying to imagine what the justification for a SWAT raid like that would be. Were they hoping to catch you in the act of hacking into an intelligence firm or something?
It was just for fun. I mean, they have all this equipment. It costs a lot of money. They don't get to necessarily use it as much as they perhaps would like to. And so when they get a chance to do it, they do it with gusto.
Brown was somewhat famously charged for, among other things, sharing a link in a chat room to classified data that had been obtained in a hack of a private security firm called Stratford. Curiously, Stratford wasn't mentioned in the original search warrant, though. Brown believes that this was because they were actually interested in a different line of his work. He had launched a crowdsourced platform called Project PM to investigate the murky world of private intelligence contractors after the hack of a firm called H.B. Gary. Brown and his team discovered in the hacked emails that several of the firms joined together into a conglomerate called Team Themis. One of Team Themis's projects was to develop potential lines of attack against critical organizations like WikiLeaks and journalists like Glenn Greenwald. And they detailed some of their methods in a PowerPoint presentation that Brown and his team distributed to the media. Brown believes that the Team Themis investigation is what put him on the Fed's radar.
We know what this case was about. This case was about H.B. Gary. It was about Endgame Systems. It was about this large informal network of state and corporate contractors and intelligence officials who believed that we have too much freedom to speak out against U.S. policy.
What is the public interest in knowing this information?
We found executives and we found developers with these companies, and we found government officials colluding against the U.S. public in ways that have no defense. These technologies are still little understood, in many cases entirely unknown outside of a few companies, and which have the ability to influence our national consciousness in ways that would have been impossible just a few generations ago.
Explain that a little bit. What are some of the methods that we do understand now that they use to influence the public consciousness or public opinion?
The most disturbing is persona management. This is something that came out of the H.B. Gary emails about a month after the original hacks. It was one of our main focuses. There was a contract put out by CENTCOM under the U.S. Air Force for companies to develop software and methodologies by which a single person sitting at a desk could control, say, 10 to 20 fake online people with names, backgrounds, histories. The software facilitates their conversations from day to day, as in they're able to maintain a certain, not just speak in a different language, through translation software, but even maintain a particular cadence. Remember what was said. And that can be used in a number of different ways. I mean, if you've seen, what can happen with a single person just in a very primitive way, creating sock puppets online in order to, fake incidents, and incidents are what drives our media coverage. Given the systemic problems with our media, when you start bringing in these alliances of companies that can now alter the public perceptions in ways that are still understood, we're looking towards a period of extraordinary confusion, even beyond what we've had in the recent past.
One of the FBI's moves during the investigation was to charge Brown's mother with obstruction of justice for moving a laptop out of their view. He says this is what ultimately sent him over the edge and led him to create this bizarre 3-part video series in which he appears to threaten the lead investigator on his case. The threats against an officer charge had stuck during the plea bargaining, during which Brown's legal team negotiated down from a maximum sentence of more than 100 years to 63 months.
What was your mindset at that point when that video went up?
I had gotten off heroin a while back. I was using Suboxone, which is a synthetic opiate, to control my heroin addiction. And I was trying to get off Suboxone at that point. I also stopped taking an antidepressant called Paxil that I've been on for the past few months. And apparently when you do that, it kind of leads to a manic state. But the more important background on that was that, for the past several months, I've been actively investigated by the FBI. They raided my apartment. They raided my mom's house. They'd taken a number of computers. They'd issued threats to indict my mother. I felt that at this point I was going to go under, and that my mother might, go under as well. So I'd given up, conventional methods of bringing this to attention. I decided to make a video explaining everything that had happened, what had been done by certain people associated with H.B. Gary, who had posted my actual address, which was hard to find at that point, and my mother's actual address for the Zetas during a point when the Zetas were supposedly going to come kill me because of this anonymous operation.
The Zeta drug cartel,
Right.
just to be clear.
Yes, those would have been regarded as illegal had we done them against somebody. But the fact that these ex-military people were doing them, and the fact that it was all kind of on Twitter and online, I guess perhaps struck many journalists as sort of amorphous internet drama, as opposed to a real thing that actually mattered. So I'd given up asking for help. I figured that my only option here is to lay everything out, explain what's happened, make an ultimatum, explain that if they come back again in conjunction with what I consider to be a criminal conspiracy against me, very similar to the criminal conspiracies we'd already exposed, that I would defend my household against any FBI agents. In addition to that, separate from that, I also said that I was going to ruin this federal agent's life. I was going to do exactly what Aaron Barr had been shown to be planning against the families of activists as part of his Team Themis operation. It wasn't a violent threat, it was a threat to use these same methods. But ultimately, because the way the indictment was phrased, the way they cut out part of that sentence, and the way they conflated two different sentences from different parts of the video, the quote the press got was more ambiguous than the actual one I delivered, which could be seen on the video. And so there was this conception that I'd actually threatened to kill this agent. So these were all flimsy charges. Nonetheless, I did eventually plead to it because the alternative was to go to trial with FBI agents who had already lied about me several times on the stand in different hearings. And that's generally, you want to avoid that generally.
There's been critiques of Anonymous and WikiLeaks from all angles, but the one I'm most interested in hearing your response to comes from people like Glenn Greenwald and Edward Snowden, who say that the uncurated release of information, releasing, innocent people's credit card information and so on, is actually damaging to the project of transparency. What's your response to that?
On the whole, there's a number of reasons not to release large caches of information. One of which is that when you do, it's not very effective. It tends to work better if you release parts of it that you've analyzed, or you release parts of it to different journalists you work with. And that's actually what WikiLeaks and sometimes Anonymous, for the most part, has done. I was always opposed to kind of the stuff that LulzSec did when they kind of went off the reservation in summer of 2011 and just started hacking things for fun. And that's really what it was. There were times when they would say, we're doing this to remind you about security. Well, that's bullshit. They weren't doing that. I knew these guys. They were doing it for fun, and to some extent, since it was being done in part under Hector Monsegur, Sabu, who at that point was an FBI asset, there's reason to believe that that kind of behavior was encouraged by the FBI. But the FBI wouldn't have had to step in and get them to do that. That's the kind of stuff that segments of Anonymous had already done. When you have a activist movement that's really built on what was previously a trolling group, those are inevitable problems. And that was one of many reasons why at different times I detached myself from what was going on in Anonymous, concentrated more on a group that I could, control to some extent, or at least know what it was doing. At least, something I could say, this is something that I approve of.
Since the 4 years have passed with you behind bars, I would say the world has gotten even leakier. We've seen the impact that WikiLeaks has had on this past election. What's your reading on the election and the role that leaks played in it?
I mean, now we're seeing the age of non-state actors sort of come into its own. We're seeing this bizarre scenario in which individuals can, have a lever by which they can move large objects in ways that, again, this all comes from the information age and the fact that for the first time in human history, any individual can collaborate with any other individual on the planet. And the implications of that are not yet fully realized. But I think with this past election, we're seeing what that means. It's obvious.
You can go check out the rest of that, and you can find that at Reason.com or on Reason TV on YouTube. Check them out. Watch the rest of that. And I think, one thing some people don't realize is if you use electronic devices, you're not ever 100% secure. You have legitimate fears on both sides when it comes to hackers and the government hackers, the people that do it for government, whether they realize they're doing it or not. Let's say they work at some company that tends to give information freely to government. That person might not know what they're doing. Some might create tools that they don't realize the implications of those tools. And then we have people that do it intentionally. And when you look at a lot of polls, when it comes to government and corporations, a lot of the population do not have a problem with those people getting hacked. They have a problem with the everyday citizen. Does that mean that's right? I don't know. I think if there's legitimate cause for concern, maybe corruption or, things that we fear in politics and corporations, and if the documents aren't released in an investigation, there's no actual public investigation that's completely open, you're going to have hackers come in and do the work. And that's where you get WikiLeaks. How deep corruption has gone for such a long time, the internet has given, birth to these hacker groups out here that go, no, I know there's something wrong here. They hack and they release the information. What we hope is innocent people aren't, attacked. And then on top of it, even the guilty, that we hope they would get, a trial. We don't want vigilante type justice. What we want is justice, but a proper trial. I think, if you're accused of something, you're going to want a trial. You're not just going to be like, no, he's guilty, send him off, never to be seen again. You don't want that. So we have to take that into consideration too when we look at other people we believe may be guilty. They still deserve a proper trial. Violent action is just going to cause more chaos, definitely in our very fragile state as a society right now, with so much pandering to, let's start, race war over here, back and forth. And I don't believe everybody that's, trying to bring awareness to maybe, discrimination is on that path, but we know there are actors out there trying to stir that up. Everybody stay tuned here on UCY.TV. Great broadcast coming up after this. And don't forget, go to UCY.TV, scroll down towards the bottom. There's an Amazon button down there. You click that button, it'll take you to Amazon. Shop Amazon through UCY TV. You get the same great prices, same great shipping rate. And at the same time, UCY gets a little kickback that helps cover operating costs on the network's end. Very important, definitely, in the environment we're in now, where a lot of the ad services that could help, networks like a lot of UCY and other alternative media, it's slowly being cut off. So when we do have these options to make $1 here and make $1 there to help cover operating costs, that is always gratefully appreciated. So again, UCY.TV, scroll down on the bottom, click the Amazon button. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Stay tuned here on UCY.TV, and I will catch you next weekend. And, you can't be in despair. We have to be able to rise to the occasion for freedom. Take care.
the Anti-Media Radio. Your host, Nick Burnett.